We're trying to reduce the prison population. We're trying to end mass incarceration. I gave her my whole rap.
But in America, we don't talk about slavery. We don't talk about lynching. We don't talk about segregation. And because of that, we don't have a healthy relationship.
My work is, of course, on criminal justice reform and on changing the narrative around race and poverty.
The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is honored to present the 2018 ALC Co-Chairs Award to Bryan Stevenson for his exemplary leadership in social justice advocacy on a national level.
Senator Kamala Harris will present the second ALC Co-Chairs Award to Bryan Stevenson.
So there are words that have been spoken, and the words are this: each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. Those are the words of Bryan Stevenson, one of our generation's great truth tellers. Bryan Stevenson has figured out that if we're ever going to deal with our broken criminal justice system, if we're ever going to deal with our nation's painful history, if we're ever going to address the distrust in our institutions and leaders, we have to speak truths, uncomfortable though they may make people feel. And that's exactly what he has done. He has done it in his TED Talk, titled "To Talk About an Injustice," which has been viewed more than 5 million times. He has done it as the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Just Mercy, which is one of a handful that sit next to my desk. He has spoke truth in a way that has earned him an NAACP Image Award and a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. And his words have resulted in action. Because of Bryan Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, folks, hear this, because of Bryan Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, over 125 wrongly condemned prisoners on death row have won reversals, release, or relief. And he didn't stop there. Bryan realized there needed to be a physical reminder of one of America's darkest truths, a legacy of lynching and racial terror. So he became the driving force behind the powerful new memorial in Montgomery. Bishop Desmond Tutu has called him, quote, Bishop Tutu has called him, quote, America's young Nelson Mandela. And I am proud to simply call him a friend. Welcome, Bryan Stevenson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I first want to just invite everybody here to come to Montgomery. If you haven't been, we invite you to see our National Memorial for Peace and Justice. We want you to come to the Legacy Museum. And we built these sites because we believe that we need to tell the truth about American history. I don't think we're free in America. I think we're burdened by a history of racial inequality, and I believe in truth and reconciliation. I believe in truth and reparation. I just believe that truth and reconciliation are sequential. You got to first tell the truth before you can get to reconciliation. And so I'm grateful that the Congressional Black Caucus has invited me here tonight, because they're going to stand with us in this education problem. We've got to teach some things to our country. We've got to teach America that we are still burdened by a history of racial inequality. We're not free yet. There is smog in the air created by the legacy of slavery. We've got to teach this country that the great evil of American slavery wasn't involuntary servitude. It wasn't forced labor. I believe the great evil of American slavery was the narrative of racial difference that we created to justify enslavement. They made up these lies that black people aren't like white people. We're not fully human. They got the court to say we're 3/5 human. They ignored our pain. They didn't pay attention to our victimization. And because of that, we're continuing to struggle. And we didn't really deal with this problem, this narrative of racial difference, this ideology of white supremacy. And when you read the 13th Amendment, it talks about ending involuntary servitude. It talks about ending forced labor, but it doesn't say anything about ending this narrative of racial difference. And because of that, we've got to teach America that slavery didn't end in 1865. It just evolved. It turned into decades of terrorism. We've got to teach them about the black people that were pulled out of their homes and burned and drowned and menaced and hanged throughout this country. We've got to teach them that older black people are saying to us every day, they say we get angry when we hear about people talking about how we're dealing with domestic terrorism for the first time in our nation's history after 9/11. These older black people are saying, look, we had to worry about being terrorized all of our lives. We've got to teach our country that the demographic geography of this country was shaped by racial terrorism. We've got to make them understand that the black people in Cleveland and Chicago and Detroit and Los Angeles and Oakland did not go to those communities as immigrants looking for new economic opportunities. They went to those communities as refugees and exiles from terrorism in the American South. We've got to make our country understand that there's still a presumption of dangerousness and guilt that burdens black and brown people, and we are not free yet. We've got to make them aware of the fact that 1 in 3 black male babies in this country is expected to go to jail or prison, and that's not right. We've got to make them understand that we have a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent, and that's not right. And so I'm grateful that the Congressional Black Caucus would give an award to somebody like me. I'm just a lawyer trying to do my thing, but nevertheless, I am persuaded that we can make a difference in this country. And I'll end with this. I'm from Alabama, and I meet amazing people in Alabama, and I was giving a talk, and an older black man came into the church where I was talking, and he was looking at me sternly and angrily, and when I finished my talk, he came up to me, and he looked at me, and he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I just stood there. And then he asked me again, he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I mumbled something. And then he said one more time, he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And then that older man looked at me and said, "I'm going to tell you what you're doing." And this man looked at me and he said, "You're beating the drum for justice. You keep beating the drum for justice." And I was so moved by what that man said. I really was. I was also really relieved because I just didn't know what was about to happen. And then this older man pulled me into his wheelchair. He said, "Come here, young man, I'm going to show you something." And he turned his head, he said, "You see this scar I have on my right ear?" He said, "I got that scar in Greene County, Alabama, 1963, trying to register some people to vote." He turned his head, he said, "You see this cut? That's my cut. I got that in Philadelphia, Mississippi, 1964, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head, you said, "You see this dark spot?" He said, "That's my bruise, got my bruise in Birmingham, Alabama, 1965, trying to register people to vote." And then he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to tell you something, young man." He said, "People look at me, they think I'm some old man sitting in a wheelchair covered with cuts and bruises and scars." He said, "But I'm going to tell you something." He said, "These are not my cuts. These are not my bruises." He said, "These are not my scars." He said, "These are my medals of honor." And so I'm excited tonight to be with the Congressional Black Caucus because I believe together we can do some things. And I think they're saying to me with this award to keep fighting. And because they're saying it, I'm going to stand even when some people say sit down. I'm going to speak even when some people say be quiet. We're going to keep fighting to do justice. And I'm not worried that when you stand in front of people who are angry and hostile and bigoted, you do get cut, you do get bruised, you do get scars. But tonight I believe that those scars and those bruises and those cuts are the way we earn our medals of honor. And I'm I'm grateful to be encouraged by all of you. Thank you all very, very much.